This week, we're going back to Dunluce Castle. In my last video, I uncovered the historical background of the castle. In this video, I'm going to talk about the supernatural events at Dunluce and share the backstory of how several ghosts came to haunt the castle. So get ready. It's time to go deep in the Crypt, a channel dedicated to the paranormal, the strange, and the supernatural. If you like the video, please flog the like button and subscribe to the channel. And now, let's go deep in the Crypt. Maeve Roe. The tragic story of Maeve Roe MacQuillan is well known to those who live in County Antrim in Northern Ireland. Maeve was a member of the MacQuillan family who at one time owned Dunluce Castle. Her father, chief of the MacQuillans, doted on his daughter and loved her very much. When Maeve came of age, her father arranged for her to be married to another local chieftain who was an older man. As was common practice in the 1500s, marriage was used to forge alliances between powerful families, and this arranged marriage was no different. But when Maeve heard the news of her impending marriage to this man, she was horrified. Unknown to her father, Maeve had already promised herself to a young local man, Donnacha O'Cahan. The Tower. Now Maeve protested to her father that she had already found the man that she would marry, but her father insisted that she would marry the man that he had chosen. According to him, Donnacha was too young and immature, and as he had neither wealth nor land, he was a poor marriage choice. When Maeve, a headstrong young woman, refused to obey her father's wishes, he became enraged. The chief grabbed his daughter's arm and forced her upstairs into the north tower of the castle, overlooking the sea. He cruelly yelled at her that she would stay in that tower until she changed her mind and acquiesced to his wishes. And so, Maeve was imprisoned in the north tower of Dunluce Castle. A shroud. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Maeve's condition in the tower began to deteriorate as she was overcome with sadness and she refused to eat. The MacQuillan chief grew concerned about his daughter, but he would not relent. One day, while visiting his daughter in the tower, he found her sewing a white garment. Excitedly taking this as a sign that Maeve had changed her mind, her father asked if she was sewing a wedding dress. Maeve replied morbidly that she was making a burial shroud, which shocked and greatly saddened her father. Escape. While Maeve was locked in the tower of the castle, she and Donnacha had continued to communicate by passing messages through her chambermaid, and they devised a plan to escape together to Scotland. One night, when the MacQuillan chief was away from the castle, they put their plan into action. Maeve had bribed the jailer to release her from the tower by giving him her precious jewellery, and at the appropriate time, Maeve left the tower and made her way outside into the night. The storm. Not uncommon in Ireland, a storm was building that night, and the rain began pounding on the castle walls. Maeve looked over the cliffs to the water below, where she saw Donnacha on the shore with a little rowboat. Gathering her courage, Maeve began climbing down the cliffs. Donnacha watched nervously from the shore below as Maeve climbed down the slippery rocks. His heart was pounding in his chest as he waited for Maeve to reach safety. Maeve had climbed down these cliffs many times as a child, and she knew how to navigate them well, but the howling wind and the driving rain made the descent a daunting challenge. When her foot slipped, she had to cling on tightly with all her strength to the rocks to avoid falling to her death. Finally and heroically, Maeve made it safely down to the bottom, and the couple embraced on the little beach. Maeve quickly boarded the boat, and Donnacha pushed it into the water before climbing in himself. He took up position in the little boat with the 2 oars in his hands and began rowing strongly against the waves. Now the boat was battling against a storm, and the couple were getting drenched by the rain, but Donnacha kept rowing steadily through the sea. MacQuillan returns. Meanwhile, back at Dunluce Castle, the MacQuillan chief had returned for the evening. He went to visit his daughter in the north tower of the castle. Over the last few weeks, the chief had had a change of heart. It hurt him terribly to see his daughter suffering, and he had decided to give her his blessing to marry the man she chose. But of course, when he went upstairs to the tower, He was shocked to find the room empty. His daughter Maeve was nowhere to be found. He ran to fetch the chambermaid and demanded to know what had happened to his daughter. The chambermaid cried and then confessed that she had helped Maeve to escape the castle. Now she was on a boat with Donnacha, and they were on their way to the nearby town of Portrush. In the morning they were to escape to Scotland, but the storm was strengthening and she feared for their safety. Tragedy. The chief ran up to the tower and looked out into the blackness. Suddenly, he saw a small light flickering from the rough seas. He could see this was a lamp on board a little boat, and he knew immediately that his daughter was also on board. He watched the boat being tossed side to side in the storm, and he was filled with dread. Then he watched in horror as a huge rogue wave appeared and crashed over the boat. The boat was smashed to pieces, and the little light went out. Maeve's father looked on helpless to save his daughter, who would now surely drown. The poor man dropped to his knees in the tower and wept. The next morning, Donnacha's body washed ashore, but Maeve's body was never recovered. Every day, the heartbroken father went down to the little beach searching for his daughter's remains that would never be found. One night, as he was pacing on the shore, he looked up to the north tower of the castle, and he saw Maeve's ghostly face looking down at him. The old chief lamented that she looked as sad as she did when he locked her in the tower, and he felt the familiar pain of guilt and regret for being so stubborn with her. Understandably, he blamed himself for his daughter's demise, and he died shortly afterward of heartbreak and grief. The ghost of Maeve Roe. As you might expect, there are many accounts of the ghost of Maeve haunting Dunluce Castle. For many years after the tragedy, the servants of Dunluce Castle refused to go into the North Tower, where Maeve had been kept prisoner. They believed her ghost inhabited that room, and they refused to go inside. So the tower was locked up and abandoned. When the tower was opened up more than a decade later, it was found to be completely spotless. Shockingly, no dust whatsoever had gathered in the years since the disappearance of Maeve. Some people believe that the ghost of Maeve Roe continues to keep that room dust-free. More sightings. In the 1500s, shortly after Maeve's drowning, an apparition of a white lady appeared at sunset, looking out to sea. Sometimes she was heard crying and wailing as a banshee. In 1534, a young MacQuillan boy saw the white lady walking on the cliffs. He returned to the cliffs the next day with his brother, telling him about the woman he had seen, but she failed to reappear. When the boy reached his 30s, he began hearing stories that people had recently seen a woman in white walking on the shore at sunset. The next day he went to the place where he had first seen the woman, and she reappeared. Now, being a rather fearless young man, he walked up to her and spoke. When he did this, she turned to him and then vanished. The white woman was never seen again. Even up to the present day, haunting, banshee-like screaming and wailing has been heard coming from the North Tower. It's believed that this is the ghost of Maeve lamenting her cruel fate and the ending of her life, and her love for Donnacha cut short. People have also reported feeling a woman brushing past them in the southeast tower of the castle. The kitchen tragedy. Now, there was another terrifying tragedy that took place in the ill-fated Dunluce Castle some years after Maeve lived there. A feast was being held one night at Dunluce, and the Great Hall was filled with many noble guests from different parts of Ireland. On this particular night, there was a terrible storm, and the wind howled mercilessly outside the castle. In the kitchen, the servants and cooks were rushing around to keep their dignified guests fed, wined, and entertained. Suddenly, and without warning, part of the rocky cliff that supports the castle collapsed, sending the entire kitchen plunging hundreds of feet to the brutal rocks below the castle. A total of 7 servants lost their lives in this tragic accident. In the Great Hall, the visiting guests heard the terrifying howls and screams of the servants as they plunged to their deaths below the castle. One of the servants who miraculously survived the incident said that he had been working in the kitchen when out of nowhere he was pushed forcefully by unseen hands against the wall of the kitchen. He watched in absolute horror as the floor of the kitchen broke away and plummeted downward into the night. He claimed that his life was saved that night by the ghost of Maeve Roe, but he never understood why he had been so lucky to be spared such a dramatic death. Now, detractors of this story say it never happened, because the kitchen still exists in the ruined shell of Dunluce Castle. But I would say if this event did happen and the castle remained occupied, wouldn't they have rebuilt the kitchen in a new location? Disturbing events. Back in the present day, strange events continue to take place at the castle. On stormy nights, the screaming of the servants who fell to their deaths on the rocks can be heard piercing through the wind and the rain. Workers in the gift shop have reportedly opened up the shop in the morning only to find books placed neatly on the floor in front of them. On another occasion, the workers arrived to find the radio blasting out music first thing in the morning. This story reminds me of a ghostly encounter that I had of my own. About 13 years ago, I was lying on my bed listening to the radio at a low volume, and instantly, without warning, the radio went up to maximum volume. It was like it went from 2 to 11 in less than a second. There was no gradual increase as if someone had turned up the dial, but instantaneously, which honestly scared the crap out of me. And as I mentioned in my last video, the ghost of Peter Carey, who was hanged in the castle, has been spotted wearing a purple robe, wandering the hallways of the castle. Final wailings. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the story of Maeve Roe and the ghosts of Dunluce Castle. And I want to thank you for watching. But do you believe the castle is haunted? There are so many claims of reported ghost sightings at this castle. From the White Lady and the howls of the Banshee, to Peter Carey, the disturbances in the gift shop, and the screams of the servants heard on stormy nights. Personally, I am fully convinced that Dunluce Castle experiences a lot of supernatural activity. But what do you guys think? Please remember to flog the like button on the way out and subscribe to the channel. And remember, stay scary.